Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon or good evening. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of Friday Morning at the Funhouse with Martin Popoff.
Morning, sir.
Morning.
Yeah, looking forward to this one. This is a really weird one, but
it's a really weird one. But we got the sunshine helping us today.
Yeah, us too. Finally. Yeah. Up here in Toronto, same thing. Nice and sunny. Perfect temperature. Yesterday was a heat wave, but pretty nice today.
Cool. That's good. This is our first nice day since early in the week because it's been cloud central for the last 2 days and on and off rain and just miserable and chilly, like in the 60s. Like, what's going on with this? My pool temperature is back down to like 65. I'm like, I guess I'm not going in that anytime soon. But heat wave this weekend for us. I think you guys sent it down here. Like 80 today, almost 90 tomorrow and Sunday. So and humid. You guys have that high humidity up by you?
Not too bad. Toronto's a nice, four seasons place, right? You get all four seasons, although, they say you only get summer and winter and construction, right? That's the big joke about Canada, right?
Yeah, true. Yeah, we have the same thing. So we get the humidity here bad in the summer, which kind of sucks, but what are you going to do? Anyway, now that you have your weather forecast, so today's topic is an interesting one, and we actually did this one kind of on the fly. We had something else we were working on, and we decided to scrap that. That does happen, folks. Just so you know, there are weeks where we come up with a topic, and then midway through the week, we're like, "Yeah, this is not working," and we just scrap it and do something else. Today is the something else, and
did we tell them what that was?
And we can tell them what. Yes, go ahead, Martin. You can tell them what that was.
Yeah, we were looking at we did our favorite bands for lyrics, and we were going to do worst bands for lyrics, and then we started talking and go, I don't know, man. It feels like personal. It's like we're calling these people stupid, right? And it's and then it just feels like you're complaining, or you sound like you're a snob. It's like, oh, I'm all literary and I know this is terrible lyrics and all this, right? And then people love those lyrics, so it just felt negative and really kind of nasty to do, right?
Yeah, and for me, I've said a million times here on the channel that I don't really pay attention to a lot of lyrics. So I'm like, so now all of a sudden Pardo is going to get on here and bitch and moan about lyrics he doesn't like when he half the time doesn't even read lyrics. And then I told Martin, and I'm not going to name any band names right now, but half the list I was coming up with were all German bands. And then people are going to be like, well, but they don't have a grasp of the English language. You can't take it out on them. And I'm like, this sucks. So we decided not to do that. So
yeah, that's funny though about Scorpions. I just thought my whole life, I thought like, just get some English buddies to just go through this for 15 minutes and just fix the really embarrassing stuff. It's like, how hard can that be, right?
I know it's I mean, man, it's like the last couple like Accept albums I've gotten to, like, looking at the lyrics, I'm like, I love these songs, but this shit is terrible, right? So so we decided not to. Well, now we just named two that were on my list, but we decided not to go that route today. So instead, we've got a kind of an interesting show where we're going to be talking about we're going to call it rock and roll MVPs. And basically, Martin and I each have 5 guys, well, could be women too, but in this case, I think they all turn out to be guys, who are basically the driving forces within these bands. And they have been for a long time. They kind of call the shots, they pick the lineups, and I think they write a lot of the songs or co-write a lot of the songs. And they have been, and in many cases, many of these folks have been founding members of these bands. But when you think about these bands, that's the person you think about. And we're going to kind of talk a little bit about how that all came to be and why they are what they are and blah, blah, blah. So I'll have Martin start off with his first selection. If you want to give a little more commentary on this, go right ahead.
Yeah, it's funny. It's so I went through, well, you and I talked back and forth about this word MVP and like or acronym MVP, how it kind of applies and how it doesn't. We can't think of a better word, sort of thing. So yeah, it might be neat to mention along the way, in what way are they MVPs and what way are they not? But the other thing that I found interesting is I started going through a ton of bands and realized there's a lot of bands that don't have this kind of guy in it, right? Yeah. And, I kind of, when you first suggested this, I thought, okay, I want this to almost be like the guy in the band where, this is exaggerating, but the guy that you feel sorry for because that's all he has in his life, where he's so obsessed by the band, and the other guys seem to be a little more well-rounded and have other interests, but you associate this guy with the band so much the proverbial, he's the first guy in the morning, and he's the guy turning off the factory lights at the end of the day to go home, right? And he gets in his car at midnight and drives home, kind of thing, right? Yeah. That kind of situation, right?
Yep.
So my first one, I went with Steve Harris, and I wanted to show this because this is where you get the other guy in the band who's the MVP. You get Bruce Dickinson, who we can discuss. But Steve Harris, of course, to me, he's obviously he's the heart of Iron Maiden in a certain way. He's only the bass player, and that is an only, because in most cases that's a lesser importance role. But he's also the most prolific lyricist in the band, followed closely by Bruce. And the other interesting thing I always found is that Bruce, for all his complexity, in the way he is, and he's a Renaissance man, and he flies and he fences and does all these different things, and has a great solo career with really good albums. I always found it so funny that it's almost hard to distinguish the writing between the two, the lyric writing between Steve and Bruce. They're so similar. And even Yannick comes in and kind of, well, actually on the music end, you've got Yannick, Steve, and Dave, who all write the same way. And Adrian's considered a little bit different. But of all these guys, so Steve is the guy who started the band and went through all those legendary different members of the band, even before they get to the Soundhouse tapes and the debut album. I consider him the co-manager of the band. It's basically him and Rod that call the shots, more or less. I thought this was funny. I took this out because, Steve is Eddie in a certain way, and here it is being proven in a, in almost more of a graphic way, that he's the guy you would associate most with even being Eddie. But you think of Steve, you think of, Bruce is standing there singing the songs, but Steve's got his foot up on the monitor and he's mouthing the words. So it's like he's selling the songs, and he knows the songs, and he he knows the lyrics, so he's in there very intrinsically in that way as well. So he's just the heart of the band. He's the heart of the band all the way through. He's the boss of the band. In fact, if you include Rod and all 6 members, Steve is basically the top guy in the band, followed probably by Bruce, followed then by Rod, I would say, in that hierarchy. So yeah, he's the guy I feel is the MVP in that way. But the other exciting thing is that the fans love Maiden so much, and they love the whole idea of it, and they love the idea that it is Steve's band so much that almost at this point, when Bruce starts making murmurs about, I'd like to be involved when we the next singer comes in after me, sort of thing, the fans are probably all sitting there going, bring it on. Let's see what happens. If he's involved in it, and Steve's still the core of the band, let's go another 10 records without Bruce at some point, if he chooses to go out, and we'll all enjoy, and we'll all debate like cats and dogs, that situation, right? So he's such an MVP in the band, Steve is, that I almost feel like the fans could deal with another vocalist in the band again, because he's such a huge heart of the band. And like I say, he's uncommonly a big lyric and music writer in the band as well. So is he the MVP in this weird situation? Because in some of these others, maybe he's not so much, but in this weird situation, even though he's only the bass player, quote unquote, and not the lead singer, because lead singer is often the MVP. I think in this odd situation with the way the Maiden community is, he really is the MVP, and it's not Bruce, who might be the obvious choice for MVP.
Yeah, well, I think you take Steve out of the equation, it's not Iron Maiden anymore.
Yeah,
right.
But also, again, it's weird, but the fans might have a great time watching an Iron Maiden without Steve. Like, say he's sidelined for some reason, right? And it's like, okay, now we still got Bruce singing, and we got lyrics, and I'm sure Steve's going to still write lyrics, unless it's an acrimonious split and I'm quitting my own band, and you guys have the name and go on without me or whatever. But the cool thing is any one of those guys, it might be kind of interesting to see what would happen if one of them was gone. So
yeah, the whole concept of Iron Maiden without Bruce, going forward, because obviously that may happen at some point, right? I think it works as long as it's not Blaze Part 2, and I don't necessarily mean Blaze coming back. I mean a singer kind of like him. I think that you have to have a singer that's got a certain amount of charisma, certainly live. And I think that Bruce kind of fits that mold. And I don't know if there are many other singers like that that would perfectly slot in there, but it's an interesting concept, and it'll be fascinating to see over the years whether that actually comes to pass, or whether, you know, the band as a whole decides to retire together at some point, or whether Mr. Harris decides he's going to be playing Iron Maiden music till the day he dies, which you never know, might be.
Yeah. One other quick point on this whole MVP concept and with Maiden, you know, I've often thought of these other members. So just very quickly, I mean, Nico, it seems like he has other interests as well. Like he could have a perfectly great life without Maiden. Adrian Smith seems that way as well. They have other hobbies, you know, other ways of thinking, other things they want to do. So that's a little bit of this as well. You never really think that with Steve, even, you know, and it took Steve a long time, even though he's a great musician and writer and all that. It took him a long time to ever consider doing a solo album career, whatever, British Line, right? So, so that's kind of part of this MVP thing as well. It ticks certain boxes more stronger than others, I guess.
Yeah. All right. So my first choice is a singer, actually. And this is kind of a unique one here, because this particular guy was the front man of the group under his name, right? Although it wasn't his name originally. And at the time, it was basically a band of all equals, until little by little, the guy that fell into the name Alice Cooper all of a sudden became the kind of focal point of the band. So much so that all the attention was going to him. He was doing all the interviews and every, you know, Alice Cooper, all of a sudden, instead of Alice Cooper, a band, became Alice Cooper, the guy. And it eventually led to him saying, well, I don't know if I really need the guys anymore. Let me go do my own thing. And that kind of started, you know, right here, obviously, with Welcome to My Nightmare. And from there on to this day, Alice Cooper became more of this kind of like revolving door solo career, but with lots of steady bands throughout the history. But never, I don't think Alice, maybe it just happened this way, maybe this is what he wanted, but I don't think that he, it never turned out where he had a solid band with him, where it felt like an actual band. Like it's always kind of felt more like a solo project. But with that saying that, he's had lots of musicians that have stuck with him, you know, through thick and thin over the years, lots of different eras. But as always, it's always the Alice Cooper show, right? It's always Alice who kind of decides who's going to be in the band, the direction of the music and all that, you know, going through the kind of the dark years, Flush the Fashion, although how much he influenced what kind of music was being played at that time based on what was going on with him, I don't know. But, you know, all these albums here, and then, you know, the comeback in the 80s, right? The whole kind of like the glam rock, glam metal type of thing, had a really good band for that period. But again, it's Alice kind of calling the shots, you know, the 90s. And then you got the recent times, right? Where Alice now seems to really relish playing with his buddies, right? The guys, you know, the Johnny Depps and the Joe Perrys and all that, as well as getting back together with guys from the original Alice Cooper band from time to time. But, you know, in the end, it's like these albums don't happen unless Alice says it's time to do another record. So it's always about what Alice wants to do. And again, you know, he's done radio stuff, talk show stuff. He's an avid golfer, right? So he's got other things going on in his life, which I think is good. But the fact that we still have great Alice Cooper music, the guy's in his mid-70s, is a real testament to him. And he has kept himself relevant for all these years and kept an active band going. You know, you to go see the Alice Cooper group live, there's like 8 musicians up there, right? And he handpicks only the best. He plays with a lot of similar folks from time to time, but you know, in the end, he doesn't miss a beat. There's no, oh my God, the guitar player left. What are we going to do now, right? There's always usually 3-4 guitar players that are rotating in and out of the Alice Cooper group at any given time, and it's just a testament, I think. I mean, he really manages his career very, very well. I think there's applicable touring. There's a new record every couple of years or what have you, but just goes to show you a guy who quickly rose within the ranks of dominance within the original Alice Cooper group. And now he's kind of taken that into a solo career where he's been pretty much on top of everything, every step of the way.
Yeah. And the other thing about him, even when he was quote unquote one of the equals in the band, he always seemed to be the most enthusiastic guy about it, the most energetic and coming up with ideas. Again, just like we talked about with Maiden, it goes Alice Cooper, Dennis Dunaway, Shep Gordon, probably next.
Yeah.
In terms of the guys who are really like, come on, let's go, let's do stuff, let's try this, let's try this artistic thing, let's try this business thing or whatever.
Yeah.
And over the years, he's been such an explainer slash mansplainer about everything. The stories about the old songs or whatever just get better and better and longer, right? So you really see him as the guy, upholding the legacy of the band, in a way, the old band or the new band, the whole entire history. The guy's just an absolute dynamo, a force of nature in terms of, I've often thought, when I did those, I've done the Alice Cooper book, that's the timeline with quotes situation, right? And then we also worked on the Alice Cooper movie at Banger, and what falls out of all that, that old Alice Cooper book, which now is getting split into two, but that's 144,000 words of just seeing this dense life. You go, oh my God, like 2 months later, he does this, and a month later he does that. And then it's Salvador Dali, and then it's golfing, and then it's being on this TV show and that TV show or whatever. And it's like, the guy is just like out there proselytizing for Alice Cooper, just nonstop. And he's basically lived like 3.5 lives.
Oh, he has. And that's a key point, because then he made it work throughout all those lives, right? I mean, how many times did over the years have folks thought, God, Alice, he's gonna turn up dead any second now. And I mean, you look at like Glenn Buxton, right, who was the budding guitar hero in that band. And look at the 70s, right? All about guitar heroes. Yeah. He couldn't make it happen because of all his demons. He couldn't escape that. But yet Alice made it through, the alcoholism and the drug abuse and all that kind of stuff, and kept reinventing himself and made it work. And we know what happened to Glenn, unfortunately, right? Which is kind of sad.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So my next one is Jimmy Page. So here's here's some odd stuff Jimmy did along the way, right? So he's done that. He's gone out and played with Black Crowes, but of course, what does he do when he goes and plays with Black Crowes? He plays Led Zeppelin songs, right? Here's where it all starts, except for previous. Here, let's get these orientation right there. We don't want well, it did crash, so
yes.
but here's where it starts. Besides the all the studio stuff he did, but he's got this reputation where you think, to me, this is the greatest thing he did later on. But to me, you almost think that in his own mind, the greatest things he ever did later on were getting back with Led Zeppelin, curating compilations, curating DVD compilations, curating How the West Was Won, getting live stuff all in order and stuff. So he's an interesting guy where, we've learned over the years, and we see it in snarky Robert Plant interviews and whatnot, where Robert Plant has built this persona of being the guy that, I don't care about the past. I just want to move on and do this and try something new. And then the next album's going to be totally different again, and shaken and stirred, and all the old timey, archival sounds he has, and different band members all the time. But Jimmy has got to be that guy where you think, it seems like he's forgotten anything he's done past Led Zeppelin, and his whole life is about being the archivist and spokesman only once in a while, and only in front of a crowd, right? He doesn't tend to want to do interviews one-on-one like lots of them, and talk a lot. So when he talks, he says, oh, let's do this properly. Let's get a bunch of people in and sit down with a famous interviewer and do all that, right? But he and that whole reissue program, everything he did there, and getting out the tapes, and being super, super serious about, playing with all this reissue stuff. And unfortunately, it feels a little embarrassing because there's not a lot of rarities with Led Zeppelin. So he's got to just fool around and tinker with, oh, look what I did here. There's a rarity for you. We turned up the tambourine on this track,
just
right?
A little bit, yeah.
But it just feels like a little bit of of that such situation of the guy going into where, the first guy into the office, he sits down, he's lonely, no one's coming in for 2 more hours, and I'm the last guy to turn off the lights. He seems like that guy with Led Zeppelin. So he is Led Zeppelin spokesman, because John Bonham doesn't speak anymore. John Paul Jones doesn't talk about any of this very much, just super rarely. And Robert Plant seems to, his whole persona is let's not deal with, like, let's not talk about Led Zeppelin. This is me about my new album right now. It's not even about last year's album or the one before that, because he's so prolific, right? But Jimmy just seems to be, he's had this patchy, pretty unsuccessful, critically not acclaimed, Outrider, Firm, whatever, Coverdale Page career all the way through, that just nothing got really all that big or all that important or even all that creatively important in the world of rock music. And he is that guy who's like, I guess my life is being a spokesman for Led Zeppelin. So he's and of course he's the main writer and producer as well.
And I guess he's settled on that, right? I mean, as much as we all like to moan and groan about it, that we want to hear new music from Jimmy Page, it's like, the track record kind of speaks for itself, and that's what he does now. He just constantly, every couple of years you can kind of expect something new in the Led Zeppelin camp, not necessarily new music, obviously, but
or a photo book or whatever, right?
Whatever, something. Yep.
Again, even there, that annoys us all, right? It's always photo books, right? Where's the word book, right?
Yes, exactly. Maybe someday. All right, this next guy, I feel like I've talked about him a lot lately. We just did a show on Guitar Hack the other night where we talked about Whitesnake, our top 5 Whitesnake albums, and I've done a Whitesnake show here on the UK Connection recently, and I'm always talking about David Coverdale and Whitesnake, but for me he was like the top pick for this episode. So we all know the history. David Coverdale is asked to join Deep Purple. He's basically nobody, goes to great heights with Purple. Purple breaks up a couple albums later. He does a solo album, does 2 solo albums actually, forms a band called Whitesnake, handpicks all the musicians, eventually settling on a great lineup that includes 2 former Purple guys, and Ian Pace and John Lord. You got Bernie Marsden, Mickey Moody, and Neil Murray on bass. Really cool lineup. They do a handful of albums that do big business over in the UK. Come and Get It's one of them. Doesn't really catch on here for lots of reasons, but Mr. Coverdale, I think, is always a very, very smart guy who was always paying close attention to trends and things. And I know he was well aware that Whitesnake wasn't doing any business here in the States, and he was doing huge business here with Purple, right? So he's like, how do we rectify that? And he sees, like at the beginning of the 80s, he sees that harder music, heavier music is really catching on here. So what does he do? He kind of breaks up the bluesy bands, right? And goes to something a little heavier hitting. He brings Cozy Powell in, right? Brings in Mel Galley from Trapeze. Eventually Mel gets hurt, right? Mickey Moody's gone. John Sykes comes in. And all of a sudden you got these albums that are shifting away from the more bluesy stuff to this more arena rock, heavier sounds, and making lots of money, right? All of a sudden this stuff is on the radio and they're playing these big tours, but Coverdale never really happy with what's going on. There's the high profile split with John Sykes. You got Ansley Dunbar on drums here, then he's out. He decided, we got a tour behind this, right? So what does he do? He goes and grabs Vivian Campbell, fresh out of Dio, Adrian Vandenberg, who's been doing the Vandenberg thing, not all that successful, right? Rudy Sarzo's been in Ozzy's band, Quiet Riot, right? And Coverdale really has done a great job kind of following trends, much to the, I think, dismay of like folks who followed the band from the early stages, right? And maybe didn't like all this glitz and bombast and whatnot. But I think throughout all of it, he has always had a good eye for talent, especially. Doesn't always work, right? Slip of the tongue, right? Adrian Vandenberg gets hurt, brings in Steve Vai. Steve Vai's the hot new player on the scene, right? Maybe didn't work out all that well, but he has always been really quick to find the best players. When he decided to go and do new Whitesnake music again in the 2000s, he gets Doug Aldridge, also ex from Dio. He's got Reb Beach from Winger. Tommy Aldridge is back in the band. He's putting out all these albums that are very, very solid. But again, it all begins and ends with David Coverdale. When we tour, is David Coverdale. When we do an album, that's when David feels like doing a new album. Want to revisit the Purple classics? We're going to do the Purple album. Now, apparently this is the kind of the farewell tour, but he's hinted he may be open to doing new music going forward, which hopefully he does. But I think, obviously there's never a Whitesnake without him, no matter who's in the band. And again, you mentioned like those, we talked about Bruce Dickinson and Maiden. There's always usually that kind of second guy. He's been very good, I think, with having a second in command. He kind of calls it his, I think, musical director. So like Doug Aldrich was that for a while. Now it's kind of Red Beach. So he's like, I'm going to drive the whole show, but I've got a guy here who's going to kind of help me direct all the musical things going on. He's like kind of like my second guy. But make no mistake about it, it's always David Coverdale at the helm, and Whitesnake lives and breathes or dies based on what David Coverdale wants to do.
Yeah. Funny thing though, this idea of MVP, like one way he doesn't check a box, which I find super interesting, is that even though he's not ever done anything besides Whitesnake except for Deep Purple and a little bit of solo stuff, like he's not an archaeologist, he hasn't been in other super groups, he doesn't fly planes, all that sort of stuff. We don't hear about him doing anything other than fighting off bears in his kitchen because it's broken into his place in Lake Tahoe or whatever, right? That was a crazy story. I love that story. But the interesting thing about him in that respect is that you think, okay, so the only thing he's ever done is Whitesnake, but you also kind of think of him as such a charming, cool guy that it's almost like the most important brand to him is David Coverdale. It's not even Whitesnake. It's almost like he's too cool to care too much about Whitesnake. And so you hear those stories about when it's time to go out on tour, the band has to get together and routine everything and get together. And he just swans in and everything's really low key and hit it, boys, hit it, darlings. Right. And then, okay, well, I guess that worked. That's cool. Oh, we'll let it ride. I mean, if there's a few mistakes in the show, whatever. So it's almost like, this is not the kind of MVP that you feel sorry for him taking his band so seriously. He's like too cool to care too seriously about it.
Yeah. I can just picture him like in rehearsals, like, all right, you guys do, I know these songs. And then he just kind of shows up. Here's a song for you, right? That's what he does. It's like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's kind of a cool thing about him, that it almost feels like he's too cool to take Whitesnake too seriously.
Yeah. David Coverdale to me is the epitome of cool. Whether it's there's people talk all the time about how his voice is a shell of what it used to be, and to me it's like, yeah, that's probably true. But yeah, you ever like watch him in interviews? Yeah. He's like the coolest guy. That voice. Yeah. He's just. I mean, I couldn't care if he couldn't never sing a lick going forward. If he would just pop up every now and then and do an interview with someone, I'd listen to him. Yeah, he's got the greatest stories, and he's got this like kind of carefree way about him, which I just think is awesome.
And he doesn't take the lyrics seriously. So he knows they're silly. It's like, oh yeah, whatever, right? It's just fun. That's.
Could you imagine if he did take them seriously? That would be strange.
Yeah, exactly.
That would be strange. Imagine having like Spit It Out or one of those tracks. That's like,
yeah. Okay, so my next choice is Malcolm Young from AC/DC. There he is down in the corner there. Little skinny guy. Unfortunately, we lost him. There we go. Flick of the switch. Where they're kind of taking back the reins. Like here's the boss, essentially taking back the reins from Mutt Lange. Management. They're putting the screws to David Krebs, Leber Krebs, and all that situation around that time as well. So he's like the serious guy running AC/DC. I mean, it feels like it's Malcolm and then George Young and Angus Hyde, and then everybody else is not that important in the situation, and they could come, they could go, they don't got a lot of say. Everything's even Brian to some extent. I mean, here he is, he's the lead singer. Like, again, here's a situation where I think in AC/DC, Brian is the MVP because it could exist. Well, and it actually does exist without Malcolm. It literally, I mean, let's not go so far as to say it could exist without Angus, but I really do feel that in a lot of situations, and probably most of them, any musician is more expendable than the lead singer, put it that way. So in a way, AC/DC's, on a vital, visceral level, the MVP is Brian Johnson. But, I feel like Malcolm is the serious member. There's never been any solo albums, and that's probably more so a dictate handed down that nobody does anything outside of AC/DC. I think that's a little bit part of Simon's narrative. Like when he was out, like he goes to do the Dio thing, it's like, oh, sorry, okay, no, we're moving on, whatever. But so it's him and George and Angus kind of really calling the shots. Malcolm's in there in the writing. He doesn't have a big ego where he feels he has to be up front and center and playing leads in that, even though Angus has always said Malcolm can play leads as good as I can. But Malcolm's the rhythm guitarist in the band, yeah. Right? But key writer, and even at one point, well, actually for a lot of point, after a while, when they take the lyrics away from Brian, Malcolm and Angus are writing the lyrics as well, right? And they're great AC/DC lyrics. They're just like Brian's and just like Bond's, or a melange of the two, or whatever you want to call them. They're AC/DC lyrics. So yeah, it just feels like he's the quiet boss at the top, the mob boss of this cabal, this family, right? With George and Angus and Malcolm. So yeah, I feel he's definitely an MVP in that way, and it's a little bit more the Steve Harris version of the MVP, I think, in this case.
Yeah, and I've read a handful of AC/DC books, and they basically always hinted that behind the scenes he was the guy kind of keeping everything going.
Yeah,
and had that kind of personality. So, and he was more than happy to let his brother be the guy, the focal point on stage. He's just back there cranking out the riffs, but behind the stage, it's like Malcolm's the guy you had to go through for everything.
Yeah, cool.
All right, so my next choice is a guy that was part of one of the most influential four-piece bands, in the history of heavy music. And I think in the early days, you could say all four of them were equally important to what was going on in this band. You had one guy out front who became like the kind of figurehead of the band. You had the guy on bass who did a lot of the songwriting. But then you had the guitarist, Tony Iommi, who, created all those riffs. But I think throughout the 70s, basically it was all four of them kind of working together. But as the 70s wound down, and eventually they parted ways with Ozzy. And then I think really Tony's kind of move into the forefront really kind of started here, because he obviously wanted to keep Sabbath back together. Geezer even left for a little bit. Bill was having his issues, right? They wanted to bring a new singer in. They settled on Ronnie James Dio, but I think it was Tony who was really driving, let's bring Sabbath into the 80s, right? And that kind of continued. Whereas members came and went, singers came and went, Geezer came and went, Bill and Vinny came and went. He kept going. This was probably supposed to be a Tony Iommi solo album, as history shows it, but he and the record company, felt strongly about continuing on, right? We've got all the albums with Tony Martin. Again, here you have Tony Iommi. He's now running the show. Black Sabbath is his thing. He could have quit Sabbath at any time and said, you know what? We're not selling any records. We're back to playing small venues and clubs again. Maybe it's time to kind of call it quits. But Tony kept persevering, right? Hooked up with, they got Cozy Powell in the band. They just kept doing it. Eventually convinced, Ronnie and Vinny to get back for Dehumanizer. That only lasted a brief bit. Got back together with Ozzy, right? It got back together with Dio, but all throughout all of it, the one constant, the one guy I think that was the glue, kind of like Malcolm, that kind of held everything together here, has always been Tony Iommi. Because quite frankly, you can't have Black Sabbath without Tony Iommi. You can change the singer, you can change the drummer, you can't change the guitar player in Black Sabbath. I mean, that's for me, Tony Iommi is Black Sabbath, always has been.
Yeah. But a funny thing about him as well, there's a little bit of David Coverdale in him, that where part of the reason he's so cool, and same with Geezer, they're exactly the same in this. Part of their persona is to just be disinterested in everything, right? It's like you don't hear them being like preachers for Black Sabbath at all. It's like, whatever. Yeah, we did that. What album was that on? I don't remember even making that album, right? Or whatever, right? So that's kind of the funny thing about him. Just like David Coverdale, he's almost like too cool to care too much about Black Sabbath. And same with Geezer. They're both like that. I never forget that one time I was talking to Geezer about the Paranoid lyrics, and I've probably said this before, but it was just such a funny thing where he goes, yeah, I had all these extra verses to that, and they're around here somewhere. Maybe when I write my book, I'll put them in there or whatever. But yeah, it was just about this and that. And then he goes, just stupid, really. It's like he's so self-deprecating about everything they did. And we're just a bunch of stupid kids. We didn't know what we're doing. We're just doing a bunch of drugs. We're getting ripped off all over the place. It's like, whatever, whatever, I guess it just worked out kind of thing. So that's a funny thing about Tony. And also along the way, you almost get the feeling that, part of that being disinterested thing, it almost feels like you needed somebody to wave a lucrative deal in front of him, or Ralph, his manager or whatever, or somebody really saying there's a good opportunity, do this. What do you think of getting together with this guy? Like, we could put something together. I think I can get you a record deal. And it's like, it almost seems like in a lot of those cases, the coolness of Tony was that he needed somebody to coax him back. To do something, right? But again, like these guys, like, you don't really think of Tony doing other things outside. Well,
it's kind of like the Jimmy Page thing to me all over again. I mean, here you have Tony, who just basically does nothing unless it's with Black Sabbath. So he's not getting together with other guys. Oh yeah, he does it occasionally and has done it occasionally throughout the years. But kind of like with Jimmy, it's like he can't get anything going that's not named Black Sabbath. So he's just kind of content to help out with the reissues and the box sets, and that's about it. And meanwhile, everybody's like, when are we going to get something new with Tony, even if it's not Black Sabbath? And it just never happens, right? He did those couple things with Glenn Hughes, and but Geezer has kept himself busy. Geezer is like, if there's no Sabbath, I'll do something else. But I don't get the impression that Tony is like all that gung ho to do that either. And that's Jimmy Page is kind of very similar. It's like maybe he really wants to, or maybe Jimmy's just given up. But I don't know. It's very odd. Because Tony's another one. It's like, how many years has it been since Sabbath basically called it a day now? And we saw the Cologne thing. Who gives a shit about that, right? Tony's like, put a band together, for crying out loud. Even if you just release an album. But
All right. So my next choice is so here, Pete Agnew for Nazareth. And I know I've shown this before. I just love showing this, the Nashville Pussy album that matches the Nazareth album. I always just thought that was so cool, right? But the cool thing about Pete is that, we're in one of those audacious situations where Dan McCafferty's not even in the band. They get Carl Sentence in, but Pete's willed this band to continue its existence, and they've actually got 2 studio albums now. Is it a 2018 and a 2022? But Tattooed on My Brain and Surviving the Law, right? So he's kept the band going. He is known as the guy who's the hirer and firer. In the early days, he would play guitar and he switched over to bass. He's a singer, he's a writer. With Nazareth, it's a lot of group crediting all along the way, but he's in there with the writing as well. He's got his son in the band, like Lee Agnew is the drummer. Jimmy Morrison's been there a long time, so there's this continuity that he's managed to keep going through those members, the guitarist and the drummer, as time goes on. So he suffered these momentous lineup changes, the death of Daryl Sweet as well, losing Mamie Charlton, but to actually go on and do this and keep doing this and keep touring, he's a hard worker. When we did the Nazareth book, he was right in there, wanted to like go through all the text of the book and find errors and stuff like that, and which was really cool, like correct little stories that have been, myths from the past. So he was really good with that. Like, he got involved. He said, if there's going to be a Nazareth book, it's got to be done right. So he went through and did all this cool editing and stuff. And I interviewed him again, and we fixed spots all over the place. So he was really meticulous that way as well. So he just really is the big boss of this band and keeping it going. And again, it's another one of those situations. We forgot to mention this with David Coverdale, but David Coverdale has hinted that, maybe one day David Coverdale won't be the singer of the White Snake, right? Just like Kiss, right? Gene and Paul. But Pete has, mused this as well a little bit. It's like, maybe I'm not the bass player in Nazareth forever, and Nazareth continues. And he set it up really nicely because the other 3 guys are one generation younger than Pete. So they do have another 10 years in them, right? Yeah. So it's kind of cool. So if we all get used to the Carl Sentence version of the band and they go out there touring and stuff, and all of a sudden Pete's gone, it's like, I guess Nazareth can continue. So kind of cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the whole Nazareth situation for me is really interesting because I have long said, I'm usually very supportive when you've got a longtime singer of a band leaves or dies or whatever, and they choose to replace him with someone else. I'm usually all for that, right? I have had a hard time getting into hearing Nazareth without anybody but Dan McCafferty. I think because he's so unique and his vocal style is such an integral part of that band. There's been a wall that's come up for me, which I find unusual because I'm normally very open to that sort of thing. I don't know what it is. Carl's a fine singer. It doesn't work for me. I don't know why.
Yeah, top of the list is Nazareth. Second is probably Thin Lizzy. And then who else? Foreigner, maybe, but Foreigner, they have had other singers along the way and they're making albums. It's been a lot of years and all that. So it's a little different. I don't know who else would be way up that list, but those are the two top ones, right?
Yeah. All right, kind of along the line of Nazareth and Pete Agnew, my next choice is Mick Box from Uriah Heap. So I think, again, in the 70s, it was more of like a democracy, although probably towards the end of the decade, Martin, I would say that that shifted a little bit. And you had Ken Hensley probably was the kind of the mini little boss behind the scenes in Heap, but once he left the band and after the Conquest album and the band was really no more, Mick Box decided to pick up the reins and say, hey, I'm going to recreate Uriah Heap the way I see it. And that came with this album, which Martin and I are both big fans of, the Abominog album. And basically he just recreated Uriah Heap, right? He brought Lee Kerslake along with him on drums, longtime drummer, good friend, and added Bob Daisley and John Sinclair and Peter Golby, ex of Trapeze, on vocals, and created a new Uriah Heap. Kept that lineup together for a couple of years, and then they had more lineup changes, brought in Bernie Shaw on vocals, Phil Lanzon on keyboards, and basically those two guys have been his kind of like right hands ever since, all along the way. But it's always down to Mick Box, and I think Uriah Heap lives and breathes and survives and tours based on what Mick Box wants to do. They have cranked out lots of albums in the ensuing years, some really, really good ones, and they tour relentlessly. But, you talk to them, and I've spoken to guys in the band and Mick himself, and it's, Mick is calling the shots here. Mick, I think, decides what songs they're going to play live, what they won't play live, when they're going to record a new album, when they're going to tour, where they're going to tour. And they're very, very busy band. And he's just a guitar player. He writes some stuff, but the whole band is writing the lyrics and music. But this is, and I think the rest of the band really respects him as being that kind of elder statesman in the band. They understand this is Mick's band. We're happy to be a part of it, but Mick Box kind of runs the show here, and I think they're cool with that. And that's the impression I get from everybody in the Uriah Heap camp. And it's I think it's a testament to him that this band has continued on all these years creating new music that's pays great homage to the 70s stuff. Right. And they play the 70s stuff live all the time. They don't forget the past, but they continue to work in the present and the future. And I think that's a really, really cool thing. And, as opposed to other longstanding bands who just go out there and don't make new music and just play the greatest hits live all the time. I think Heat are the anti that, which I love about them.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, three points. I mean, I do love that they are a very stable band with some very long-standing members, so that's cool.
Yeah.
And the other thing is they're of such high quality on record and live that I feel like everybody cares a lot in that band. That's cool. And then the other thing that you made an interesting point there. I almost feel like if we did this before Ken Hensley left, he might be the MVP because he seems to be the guy who was more serious and cared about the art a lot more than anybody else.
He was definitely that guy in the 70s.
Yeah. He was a really serious guy. And Mick, Mick just seems like the more happy, carefree guy. And Ken seemed like, no, we got to do all this right kind of guy. Right. And I'm going to fight for my songs because I really believe in them and things like that. Right.
Yeah.
Interesting how Ken fits into that. All right. So my last choice is Roger Earl from Foghat. And the reason I picked him, it's kind of interesting. It's a little bit of a mix of the Pete Agnew situation where you find yourself as the last man standing and you actually have lost Dave Peverett. you've lost the main writer, guitarist, lead singer of the band, but they have carried on. But the other reason I like this situation is because you get a twofer with him and Linda, his wife, who is an awesome lady. She's a great manager. She's been with the band a long time. I believe she kind of started managing them for real, or actually she got with Roger as a couple in '97. But throughout the years, her history with the band and even working for the band and doing a lot of things besides as well. She's really talented in a lot of fields. Goes all the way back to 1977. But I think what's really cool is you get a couple being the anchor and the MVP of this band, and they've made a lot of great decisions together, because Charlie is amazing as the leader of Foghat. He's such a great guy and singer and everything about him. Frontman, some guitar. Brian Bassett's in there as well. So they've, the one thing I don't like about what they've done is they haven't done enough writing new material and stuff. There's a lot of live stuff and covers of blues and stuff. That's my least favorite thing about Foghat, is when they do the blues. I want to hear them write. I love Night Shift. I love the albums with songs that they've done that are more hard rock or pop or whatever, but getting away from rote blues kind of thing. So that I'm not crazy about, but I just love the fact that they've carried it on, and you get that email about Roger's birthday every year, and they just seem to do a really good job. And a lot of this, like I say, is Linda of picking their spots and putting out certain things and getting involved in various projects and playing live in the right places, and they've kept this really quality band together. And then finally on Roger, he's a rare situation where the drummer is a great character in the band. He was always that guy with the big, mutton chops mustache thing and the sunglasses and the big long hair and stuff. He's a little bit like a Neil Smith, platinum god in the Alice Cooper band. He's a drummer with character kind of thing. So he's important that way, and he's the anchor, and he's the last standing member. Unfortunately, we've had people die in this band. We lost Craig, we lost Rod Price along the way, although he wasn't in the band, I guess, when they lost him. But right. But yeah, so it's cool to see them going and to fight for an existence where it seems improbable, like a Thin Lizzy or a Nazareth. He is in that situation, but because they've got Charlie, I think he's the secret weapon that makes Foghat a viable thing after all these years.
Yeah, because I mean, Foghat's got to have like that charismatic frontman, right? But that band doesn't exist without that. So, yeah, it's. I mean, Foghat. I see them touring all the time, and I think that they, even though there are some folks that are like, but there's so many guys missing from the band, it's hard to take it seriously as Foghat. But they go and they deliver great performances, and they give the people what they want, and I think that's important at this stage of the game, right? But yeah, I would love to see more like new music from them. Because man, it's a lot of live albums. Every time you turn around, it's like there's a new Foghat live album or live DVD. I'm like, all right, that's great, but come on, guys. So get in the studio and just crank out 8 or 9 songs. That's all we're asking, right?
One thing I wanted to mention that I was quite surprised. I was reading an interview, Linda's buddies with Dave Manichetti's wife, and there was a long interview with Linda. I didn't know this, but so Dave Peverett died of cancer in February 2000. His wife, who was also named Linda, died of cancer December of that year.
Wow.
So that's pretty wild. So Dave together. And Linda both died of cancer.
Wow.
Yeah,
same
year,
so quickly. Yeah. Jeez.
Yeah.
Horrible. Yeah, I've had too many losses in the rock and roll community of late, man. It's depressing. All right, my last choice for today. Another guy that instantly came to mind as kind of fitting the mold of what we're talking about here, and that's Ian Anderson from Jethro Tel. So again, another band that started with a kind of a funny name, with a kind of a strange guy singing and playing flute and dressing weird and acoustic guitar and whatnot. But, he really early on, he was the guy writing most of the songs. And even though it was a band, right, after the first album, they got Martin Barr, new guitar player. Martin stayed in Jethro Tel working alongside Ian for many, many years. Ian is always the guy kind of directing the shift in style, right? Because Tull went from being this early British blues band to kind of this folk rock band to this progressive rock band to this kind of back to being like a progressive folk band to doing like some heavier albums, some albums, more centered on synthesizers and modern sounding to stuff today. So, obviously the big concept pieces, right? All Ian. Aqualung, Thick as a Brick, A Passion Play, right? A was supposed to be a solo album. They decided to make it a Jethro Tull album, very futuristic sounding right at the beginning of the 80s. And, up to this day, right? We've got Zealot Gene, which just came out a couple months ago as a Jethro Tull album, the first Jethro Tull album in many years. He had been doing just Ian Anderson solo albums or Ian Anderson's Jethro Tull. This is now Jethro Tull. And, a lot of people are saying, well, why is he calling it Jethro Tull when it's basically just him, no Martin Barr and a bunch of other guys? Well, in actuality, Jethro Tull really has always been about what Ian Anderson is all about and what he wants to do. He's the guy we talked about at the beginning. He's the guy who hires and fires the folks. He's the guy who sets the direction. He's the guy who writes the songs and the arrangements. He's the guy who decides what they play live. He is consumed by music. Arguably, do you think 100% of him wanted this to be a Jethro Tull album? I don't know. Again, I talked to him about that not that long ago. And I think, my guess is the record label says, well, what's going to sell more? What's going to get more attention? An Ian Anderson Zealot Gene album or a Jethro Tull Zealot Gene album? It doesn't take a genius to figure out what, right? But all throughout their long, long legacy, and for all the people who may be watching who always thought that Jethro Tull was the guy's name. No, his name is Ian Anderson, right? That just goes to show you. Back in the day, like you see this weird guy up there with the flute and, on one leg. Oh, that's the Jethro Tull. No, it's not Jethro Tull. That's Ian Anderson. But yeah, he's synonymous with Jethro Tull, and he has always been the driving force and the MVP behind this band.
Yeah, and like an Alice Cooper, right? Just a super energetic guy, super personable, and does great interviews, explains things amazingly, right? So he's just such a great spokesman for the band.
Yeah, he really is, and he's very intelligent guy. Yeah, like he almost almost like he's too intelligent. Like you can tell, like when you're talking to him, that his mind is he's crafting every word like it's coming out of a literary novel, right? Yeah, that's just the way he is, and that's really different. Like it's not like talking to like a lot of these rock stars. He doesn't get into talking about like all the crazy days, and maybe there wasn't a lot of crazy days, right? You read up on Jethro Tull, they weren't your typical rock stars, but he's definitely cut from a different mold. I think it's like it's not like talking to like a Steve Lukather when you talk to Ian Anderson, right? He's very refined, very respectful. Everything that comes out of his mouth is very well thought out and very well said. And I can appreciate that. Yeah. And it comes across in the music, I think, all throughout the years.
Nice. Cool.
So there you have some rock and roll MVPs for you, folks. Let us know what you think of some of these and list others that might come to mind for you down in the comments below. Martin, what's going on the Contrarians and on the podcast and new books and things like that?
Not sure what's going on the podcast. I think so. I don't know what I'm going to do as the next episode, put it that way. But yeah, so History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff. The last one was When Thrash Slows Down. So it was all about the slowing down of thrash,
Yes.
Somewhat influenced by the Black Album. But yeah, the books are at martinpopoff.com. Contrarians. Yeah, we had a Dio Strange Highways Dark Horse episode go up, and we're gonna have a really bad put together What If Rainbow Album episode going up. And I did another one with Ralph Chapman, which was really good, which was the Shaken and Stirred one. That one just went up. So yeah, it's kind of what's going on over here.
Cool. That Dio album kicks ass. That's the one Dio album of the latter part of the catalog that I like more and more as the years go on. Heavy. Yeah. I'm glad to hear you guys dig that. Yeah, I like that one a lot. That's it's one I ignored back in the day. Now I'm like, how the hell did I ignore this one? Great stuff.
Yeah.
All right, coming up here on the channel, we've got tomorrow the UK Connection with Simon Bray and Stephen Reed and myself. We're going to talk about our favorite and least favorite opening acts that we saw out on tour in the early 2000s, so 2000 to 2009. So that's coming up tomorrow, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So check that out. And then the episode of Album Homework Assignment you've probably all been waiting for. Lynn Versace going head-to-head with Sydney Taylor. It's all about the ladies on Sunday. That'll be happening 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Sunday morning. So stay tuned for that. And then, of course, we kick off the work week on Monday with the Hudson Valley Squares. And we are going to be exploring on the squares kind of a topic that Martin and I did last week, where the Hudson Valley Square is going to be talking about some of their favorite lyric bands, right? So everybody wants to hear what some of the favorite bands they like, where they go and read the lyrics. So you'll be hearing more from them since you already heard mine. So that's coming up on Monday. And please subscribe if you haven't already and click on that notification bell. We also have the links down below to our Ko-Fi page for channel donations, as well as our merch page where you can get cool Monsters Den shirts, Hudson Valley Square shirts, and all sorts of cool stuff. And yeah, check it all out. And thanks for watching. I am Pete Pardo for Martin Popoff. We'll see you here next Friday at the Funhouse. Have a good weekend, everybody. Take care.